Welcome to the Nordic Mythology podcast. I'm Daniel Farrand, owner of the company Horns of Odin. As always, before I jump into the show, I do have to do our plugs. For the majority of you, you have probably noticed that the vast majority of the episodes have disappeared off the public library, and I just want to explain why that is. And basically, we made the tough decision to only now have the latest 20 episodes free to air. So every week, the new episode will come on and the oldest one will come off and it'll go onto our Patreon. And it's, we've been doing this for I've been doing this for 5+ years, over 270 episodes. I commit every week to this and it's a lot of time, but it takes a certain amount of funding to keep this going and the people behind the scenes. And sometimes we have to make difficult decisions based on the longevity of the podcast. And that's where my kind of loyalties will always lie. And I love doing this and I want to do this for as long as possible. And one of the ways that we can do that and bring more money in is through putting the majority of the older episodes behind a paywall and then having the newest ones as free to air as always. So if you're up to date, the new ones will come up as they always do. But that back catalogue of over 250 episodes is now on Patreon. It starts from £3 a month. Like I say it every week. It's less than a cup of coffee, but it does really help behind the scenes and help the show keep going. So if you can go over to Patreon/Nordic Mythology podcast and check that out, you get the Q&As that we do with the guests. You get the smutty literature episodes that we do. At this point, like I said, there's hundreds and hundreds of episodes that you'll get when you sign up. So please do. And if you can, a 5-star rating, positive review wherever you get your podcasts, or, just a like and a share on Instagram. All these little things add up and maybe help somebody else find the podcast who hasn't. A subscribe on YouTube always helps as well. But let's get into today's show. Mags is on her summer holiday still, so I'm on my own again this week. But we have a returning guest with a first appearance back in 2021, where we dispelled a lot of myths around the Berserker, but I feel like we need to redo that because they never actually disappear. But my guest today is Raurigh Dale, who has worked as an Old Norse specialist throughout the United Kingdom and in research roles at the University of Cork and the University of Nottingham. He currently works at the University of Stavanger. His research interests include Old Norse literature, Viking Age history, and the reception of Vikings in popular culture. Raurigh, thank you for joining me.
Thank you for having me back.
I know it's been a long overdue.
Yep, I kind of thought that maybe I'd said something wrong last time, but
Never, absolutely not. So, for those who haven't listened to, I think we did 2 episodes. One on I think we did Danelaw.
Yeah.
And then one on the Berserker, which is, I guess, one of your specialties.
It is my specialty. It's what I'd do on Mastermind if they still had that on telly.
Yeah, that's it. And I remember that being one of my favorite ever episodes because we explored the idea of the whole Berserker trance thing being a kind of dance or hacker type thing. And I love that theory. I think it's fantastic. I think it's very much plausible. And I think we called the episode the Berserker Strut. If that
I hope so. Yeah.
Memory serves me right. So if you want to hear that and hear what Raurigh has to say about the Berserker, which we might touch on later if we get a chance, go over to our Patreon. A little early plug. You get the whole back catalogue of these episodes on there. But today we're going to talk about warriors, I guess, and how the modern era perceives the Viking warrior.
Yep.
Is that right?
Yep, that works for me. That works for me. Yep.
So,
go on. Yeah. I mean, basically, what we're talking about, or what I'm hoping we're talking about, is something I've been writing for a chapter for a new book on Viking, on historical reception of the past. And if I can give a plug for it, it comes out of the Back to Blood project that was run at the University of Stavanger for 3 years. It finished a year or two ago, and was led by Jana Shordley, who's written a bit about this, about Vikings in popular culture and in games.
Yeah.
And what I've been working on is complementary to what Dr. Marianne Moen has been working on from the University of Oslo. And she has a chapter in the volume on warrior identities in archaeology in the
Mm-hmm.
Viking Age. So once the book's finally out, and assuming everything passes peer review, whole and unscathed, I would heartily recommend her chapter too as complementary to what I'm planning to mention today.
Oh, wonderful. Yeah, we've had Marion on a couple of times as well and
Yeah,
spoken about different gender identities, which is always a topic that people
it speaks to people, doesn't it?
yeah, one way or another. It
Yeah,
it 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 brings out emotions, I think, in some people, to say the
yeah,
least. And I feel like this episode may also do that in a similar sort of way.
yeah. I feel that because I get a very strong impression that people are quite wedded to the idea of the entirety of Scandinavia as Viking warriors. Um,
Yeah.
and the whole Game of Thrones "We do not sow House Greyjoy" motto,
Hmm.
the idea that everybody carried weapons in Viking Age Scandinavia, and everybody was ready to fight at the drop of a helmet. And
I liked how you how you changed that.
so I think that there's a lot there. There's a lot that's been built up, and I think a lot of it comes out of people's wanting to have something to identify with in the past.
Hmm.
Um, there's definitely a strong sense in a lot of the literature that people use the past to justify their beliefs in the present, which is quite challenging to actually deal with in its own right.
Yeah.
Stepping back and going, hang on a minute, what was the past like? What's the present like? What's going on here?
Hmm.
And I feel like it's always been that way since we started looking.
Yeah, and
So, yeah.
I guess it is very glorified, isn't it? And I think we spoke about this a little bit last week. I feel like I've touched on it a little bit in recent weeks. How the Vikings seem to just escape any negative press for the action. There's this very kind of cool light shed on the Vikings. Everybody thinks it's like a very cool era, and they're they always see it's strange because even though if you're talking about Vikings in the strictest sense of the word, that it's somebody who
Yeah.
goes a Viking, they're very much the aggressor, but they're never kind of held accountable for that. They're never seen as a baddie for doing that, but then also very often seen as the victim in terms of Christianity, and they seem to just kind of skirt the border of all these moral lines and manage to just kind of stay on the side where people can justify their actions, even despite of the ultra violence and the claims of rape and all this and the pillaging and all these nasty things. It's always kind of like it's just the Vikings. Still really cool though, aren't they?
Yeah, they're just misunderstood,
Yeah,
as it were. I
they
mean,
didn't know what they were doing.
yeah, or it's, oh, everybody was like that back then.
Mm,
But yeah, they always remind me of like the bad guy mavericks from the action movies who do bad things, but because they're the heroes, we're allowed to empathize and sympathize with what
yeah.
they do.
So that the anti-hero, kind of the Deadpool figure.
Yeah, actually, very like Deadpool in some ways, isn't it? But
Yeah.
yeah, well, they do bad things, but hey, it was a long time ago. They didn't know better. And by the way, they're kind of cool, so they're the heroes, really.
Might have to call this episode Vikings or Vikings the Deadpool of history or something like that. That could work. I'm sure people will click on that and try and figure out how the fuck we got to that
Yep.
idea.
That works for me.
Okay. Do you have a starting point you feel works the best, or are we best trying to explore what people even see as a warrior, I guess?
I mean, that would be my starting point.
Mm-hmm.
Essentially, I feel like so much of my research has been the Inigo Montoya meme. You keep
Okay.
using that word. I do not think it means what you think it means.
Right. Is that a sense where, when you read something so many times, the word loses its
It's kind
meaning? You kind of look at it and go, is that even spelt right anymore?
not quite like that. It's more along the lines of when you look at even academic literature, one of the things that is never defined is the word warrior. People throw it in there as if everybody understands what it means and
Mm-hmm.
everybody understands that, yep, they were these guys, they were these warriors, without actually thinking who would actually have had a warrior identity in the Viking Age? Who would have likely stood up and said, hey, I'm a warrior?
Mm-hmm.
Um,
That's
yeah.
I think that's fascinating because we I feel like I was just trying to look up I'm sure there is an Oxford definition of warrior, and it probably is, according to Google AI, which is the quickest one that comes up. I know it's not the best. A person experienced in warfare or combat, often possessing great courage and skill. Don't know if that's the Oxford term, but hang on, I can get it right here. One click away. I was being lazy. Uh, a person who has experience and skill in fighting, um, especially as a soldier. But I always see on Facebook in the little groups that I fall into this whole
Mhm.
idea of there's a bunch of people who will be like, well, you're not going to go to Valhalla, you're not going to die in battle. And the other half are like, well, yeah, because battles aren't really a thing anymore, but I'm a warrior in my own right. I'm a warrior in this other sense of the world. Some people go through horrendous personal circumstances and they come out of the other side. My friend Terry, who has been on the podcast before, a person that springs to mind as somebody I would consider a warrior. I think he had kidney failure at 18. He's had 2 transplants. He's had multiple failures. Been on dialysis for the majority of his adult life, and still is one of the most positive, likable people that you could ever meet. And to me, I would say that's certainly a warrior mentality,
Yeah.
but doesn't really fit the kind of dictionary definition of it.
No, I mean, the OED dictionary definition, which I was just looking around my desk for, because I know I've got it written down here somewhere, is
Oh,
which is basically a person who has warfare as their profession.
mm-hmm. Okay,
So,
yeah, yeah.
um,
So a professional soldier.
essentially a professional soldier. I think there's more to it than that. I mean, I think that there's a difference between a warrior and a soldier, because a soldier could be a person who's conscripted into an army, but they don't think of themselves as a warrior because warrior has an aesthetic to the word, if I can put it that way.
It's almost. I feel like there's a courage to it, isn't there? There's almost like another level above a soldier, somebody who goes maybe above and beyond, and that want to be involved in combat and in violence, and
Yeah,
I guess maybe that's how I'd see it anyway.
yeah. I mean, I would be reasonably happy with that. I think that to be a warrior, it's got to be your primary occupation,
Mm-hmm.
which to some extent is why, especially coming out of the US in recent years, you start seeing soldiers in the US Army describing themselves as warriors. Um,
So yeah.
so you get that. Whereas if you're Olaf the farmer in near Trondheim, who's just been told by Sven the Berserk that you're in my army now, you're not a warrior. You're a guy who's going to have to fight, but you're still a farmer.
Yeah, okay. You're just but at what point do you then become a because I guess if the war goes on for I don't know, a couple of years. Let's say you're on a campaign, not a solid war, but it's a campaign
Yeah.
of different wars on and off. At what point does it become your kind of profession? I guess you're probably not really getting paid for it, but it's certainly your life.
Yeah, I mean, it becomes your life, and you could make that transition and to being a warrior. I think there's probably a very fuzzy boundary there too.
Hmm.
I was actually thinking about this the other day because I think about these things far too much.
I mean, it is
Uh,
your job.
it kind of is, yeah.
So, I mean,
Um,
they're getting value for money at least.
yeah, but I was thinking about the Spartans and the rest of the Greeks, and there's a quote in that comes out of one of the texts from the time where the Spartan leader looks around at all the other people from the other city states and says, "Yeah, well, you're all potters and farmers and everything else. We're the warriors."
Hmm.
Even though they're all on campaign together, because we have trained for warfare from birth. We have been brought up to fight.
Right, yeah. So is there a word for soldier in Old Norse, or would they be
There is a word for soldier in Old Norse, harmaður, which
okay?
means army man.
So you have soldier, but you don't have warrior. So at
There's
some point, the word warriors kind of become interchangeable.
there's no word that I would say is a generic warrior. You have words like kappi and berserker, and
Mhm.
kappi is always translated as champion, which you might translate it as warrior because it always refers to a king's personal bodyguard.
Would
Um,
that, in my limited knowledge, would that be akin to this idea of with Troy? Is it Troy? No, not Troy. What was the other movie that had Brad Pitt in? Achilles. Uh,
Achilles, yeah.
and they send out like the champ. I don't know if this is even a real thing where they send the champion. I've seen a bunch of different TV films and
Yeah.
shows where they send a champion out and they fight instead of the armies fighting, and then whoever wins the champion fight. That I don't know if that's based on anything historical, and if it is it possible that that's where that word comes from? Do we even know if that happened?
I mean, we think it happened. We have it all the way through to the medieval period where kings had their champions as well who would stand in for the king in duels, as well as standing beside them as their personal bodyguards in battle.
Hmm.
And if anybody's a warrior, those guys are. You get that very much with the idea that the Kappi, the champions, would fight duels,
Hmm.
so fight St. Holmgang.
Yeah.
Um, and the interesting thing there is, coming back to my favourite topic, Berserkir, is the Berserkir and the Kappi, particularly in sagas like Rolfsaga Kraka. So Rolfsaga has both in the king's bodyguard, and they're set up in literary fashion as opposed to each other, as like butting heads together, so that Buthvar Bjarki comes in and joins the bodyguard, but joins the retinue by basically breaking one of the berserk's backs, walks into the hall, and there's arguments and shenanigans ensue. And then he beats him up and takes his place on the bench higher up, nearer to the king. So, but
Well,
what's
sorry, when it comes to is it Cappy?
Rolf Kraka? Yeah.
No, but it's the word for
Oh, sorry, the
champion.
Cappy, the champions.
Cappy.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah, is that always described as just an individual person, rather than because I think the idea with Berserker there's more than one. It's maybe like a group of
There's
people.
often a there's often a group of 12 Berserkir, and there's always a group of Cappy in the sagas.
Okay, so it's not just like I was wondering whether it was just one person was maybe the leader and kind of the right hand man of the king, and they got the singular
I mean,
champion.
in the medieval sagas, individuals are singled out from among those groups, and they're the ones who get the name checks, and the rest of them are just extras for the story.
Yeah.
Um, but
Okay.
what I find really interesting is that in Snorri's Edda, he describes the court of King Rolfer. And some of the people who are named as Kappi in the saga are actually described as Berserkir in Snorri's Edda. So there's clearly in his head some crossover between the two,
Mm-hmm.
um, and a strong sense that they're all the bodyguard. They're all the ones who would actually might have said, "Hey, I'm a warrior for King Rolf," um, and there's a very strong sense that to have a warrior identity, you would belong to the social elite.
Okay. Well, that word elite is something you always see or often see alongside the word warrior. Whenever
Yeah.
people will say the warrior elite, and is that again an inkling to it being like that, a soldier but plus?
Yeah. I mean, basically, you can be a soldier, but your primary job is being a farmer and bringing the crops in. But you're a soldier because you've been dragged into the army. Whereas the guys in the bodyguard have to stand ready to defend their king whenever.
Hmm.
They would still have had farms because they need to sustain themselves. But what we read about in the medieval source material is not their farms, it's that they are part of the king's bodyguard and he has responsibility to give them weapons and gold, and in return they will stand and fight beside him and die if necessary.
At what point do we see that becoming a thing? Having a stand, I guess it wouldn't be a standing army, would it? But it would be a group of people whose job it is to be a warrior. Because I guess that's not always been the case. At some point, there must have been a king who was powerful enough to pay for it.
I mean, oh, that's that's really difficult to decide. Based on the written source material, we only actually have a medieval view of what things were like back in the Viking Age past.
Hmm.
Chances are that this developed around the time of the fall of Rome. It developed with the shift from a tribal society to a medieval society,
Hmm.
which happened. God, I'll probably get killed by various historians and archaeologists for saying this, but happened around that time, but over a period of time. It's a
Okay.
development that happens from then.
Yeah.
In the tribal society, basically everybody would have been expected to be a warrior as well as everything else.
All
In the
right. Okay.
medieval society, you start getting centralization of power, and the lords and kings start bringing together their heavies under their own roof to
Hmm.
make sure that they retain that power. And what you then get is something that is more recognizably like a king and his knights in the later medieval periods, high
Hmm.
medieval, later medieval periods.
Okay. That makes me wonder how many of the people who were going a Viking, going on a raid from Norway to the UK or from like Sweden down into the Baltic. Um, how many of those would be warriors? Because I would assume that a king isn't going to send his his trusted soldiers on a raiding campaign because it's not really going to directly influence him. Maybe if it's uh, an attack to gain more land or like an invasion, but not just to raid a few monasteries. I would assume, unless I'm completely wrong, and he is sending soldiers to do that.
I That is a very difficult question to answer based on the source material we have.
Okay.
I imagine that the Great Army, led by great Viking leaders, um, would have had people around them who identified themselves as the king's warrior, as their lord's warriors, as
Hmm.
well as a bunch of people who might have become warriors just because they were on campaign for so long. Um,
Yeah,
uh,
I'd consider that maybe because that's like an occupation, isn't it? They've
yeah,
occupied an area for a certain length of time. So in that case, I would say their aim is to conquer land and eventually if they can take the whole of England. But when it comes to the early raids, let's just say Lindisfarne for ease, it's a kind of smash grab attack. So would they be more akin to the everyday farmer who, for whatever reason, we can speculate on that, and scholars do, for whatever reason, have left Norway to go, in search of riches? Would they be more akin to the everyday farmer who's kind of got desperate or just wants a better life? Or would they be actual warriors? And I'm kind of just thinking, can we name the episode Vikings Weren't Warriors? Um, just to really amp up the.
Yeah, we're going to be challenging here then. I think that with something like a raid, if they go on one raid, then they're a bunch of ordinary Vikings who probably don't actually count as warriors by the definition I'm using. They're just going, they're pillaging, they're not there to fight a war, they're there to rescue those books from that monastery that just spontaneously burnt down while all the monks actually just suddenly died for no reason that anybody can identify.
Yeah.
So, in that respect, their primary identity is not going to be warrior. It's going to be whatever they do most of the time at home. It's going to be farmer. And from the medieval source material we have, we also know that family was a hugely strong identity too. So, we get these big genealogies introducing people because it's not just important to know who they are, it's important to know who their father was and who their grandfather was. And it makes a very strong case for them identifying by family, by where they come from, by what being a farmer, by, just that whole thing. There's much more to their identity than just swinging a sword or an axe or a spear. So yeah, those guys, not warriors. The guys with Ivar the Boneless, probably warriors.
So, yeah, I guess any army, we get, I guess, later in the Viking Age, when you get unified areas of Scandinavia under a king, those armies would be made up of both warriors and soldiers. And I guess for the ease of the podcast and the ease of terminology, let's use warrior for somebody whose profession it is to be a soldier, and that is their role, and a soldier being somebody who's drafted in from being a farmer. Because that's what most armies were. Let's be honest, the everyday people who were brought in and they had to fight whether they wanted to or not.
Yep, and we see that in Havamal itself, where it tells people to stand firm in battle. Doesn't make them a warrior; it just says this is your duty. You've got to stand by your mates and stand shoulder to shoulder with them, which is something that resonates from descriptions of the First World War, where the guys charging across no man's land said they didn't want to let their mates down in their battalion. So they charged into hell.
Yeah.
Because they had a sense of responsibility to their mates alongside them. And I think that's where we come to with the Havamal quote about standing firm in battle.
That alone is a terrifying thought. I've always felt that no matter what TV show, film you watch that depicts any battle, for that, whether it's modern or medieval or older, but particularly like sword warfare. So, like, let's just say Vikings, the TV show, or any of those, that they could never do the justice of the horrors that it must have really been, of people being glanced with swords and bits hanging off, and the smells and the crushing and the noises and the screaming. All this must have been horrendous, and the courage it takes to go into that you have to believe in something or be really scared of something else to put yourself in that position.
Yeah, I think you do. I think like I said before, that sense of duty. I mean, they might have been more used to the smells because they would also have been slaughtering their own animals, so they'd be kind of used to some of that.
Yeah. Hmm.
And I mean, there was a reason why Frederick the Great in the 18th century wanted country soldiers in his armies because they were used to the blood from working on their farms. But just the same, standing there and actually not pooping your pants
I'm
would be
sure many
hard
did.
work. Oh, it's actually referenced in a Frankish law from around that period as well.
Hmm.
You know, basically, don't poop your pants, says the law, when you're in a fight.
Oh, I would.
I imagine I would too.
It would be terrifying. It takes a special person to
But
yeah, to
the
face that.
social pressure to actually stand firm as well, though,
Hmm.
even though you're absolutely terrified.
Yeah, and if you're stood with people that you care about, particularly if you ascribe to the idea that they had something like a shield wall or some sort of
Yeah,
barrier, you have to play your role, because if you're not there, you're only as strong as the weakest link,
yeah,
and as soon as that breaks, then the whole thing collapses, and you're dooming the people that you love to you love as well.
yeah, yeah. You are. Um, and bringing it to sort of the Anglo-Saxon side of things, the Battle of Maldon describes just that happening: people running away, and everybody else dies.
Hmm.
So that poem, admittedly, it's the Vikings that win that one,
Yeah.
but Buchnoth dies because his people didn't stand firm.
Hmm. So where do you think this idea that all everybody in Scandinavia in the Viking Age is a Viking or is a warrior? As because we've already learned Vikings may not have been warriors. But where do you think this comes from? This idea that because if you have the occasional people, and again, anybody listening to this podcast knows I'm bad for Facebook groups and get in there. You do have people who will say, not everybody in the Viking Age was going, a Viking. They were farmers. They were just ordinary people. Um, but that's people who are interested in this. They're seeking out further knowledge. It's a hobby, or a particular interest. This time period. But for the everyday layperson, if you say Viking, there's just going to be a warrior. That's going to be one of the first thing a, probably a man with a beard, with or without horns on his helmet, ultra violent, strong, a fighter, a warrior. That all those instances, and that's going to be what you get from I would say 99% of people. So where do you think that comes from? Just that tie of them being
I blame the
solely that.
Victorians.
They do get blamed a lot. They get
I
blamed a
mean,
lot.
essentially, I think because there's drama and glamour around the warrior ideal, and because in the Victorian era there was a lot of that still going on about the warfare then as well. I think they focused very much on the elites. They focused on the warrior aspects of it,
Hmm.
and they ignore the other material that's there. Um, it strikes me just so strongly how people remember the cattle die, kinsmen die verses from Havamal,
Yeah.
um, but they forget all the ones about not drinking too much in case the heron of forgetfulness visits you, and not speaking out too loudly in a gathering just in case people realize how stupid you are.
Hmm.
Uh, you know, and those are the dominant ones. But people are focused on cattle die, kinsmen die. People are focused on the glamour. People have looked to the um, Fornaldar Saga. What's that in English again? Legendary sagas. Um, and the legendary sagas have a lot more violence in them than the sagas of the Icelanders. And
Hmm.
they're much more about the social elite going out and doing their thing. which largely involves beating people up and winning the princess and half the kingdom, or whatever it happens to be in that particular saga. I think to some extent, I think it's the glamour of the violence. It's the same as action movies. It's the same as all these other media that we have, like video games that are focused on the violence and not on everything else that went on. And so it spoke to the Victorians because they had these glamorous ideas. They still had these glamorous ideas about warfare.
But how? Let's say the Romans, for example, they were far more successful military wise than the Vikings ever were. You know, they conquered huge amounts of land. But when you say the Romans, you don't automatically think, you know, warrior elites and an insanely effective army that kind of swept across Europe. You think of viaducts and Roman bathhouses and mosaic tiles, maybe, and all these little, you know, all these other things attributed. Same with maybe Greeks. The Greeks were another empire, but you think of, you know, astrology. And the Egyptians, I don't know too much about, but I assume very similar. They must have had some sort of military or military presence.
Yeah.
And they don't tend to all just have that one thing. I guess the only other one would be Spartans, but I don't know if they were. I don't know how outwardly focused the Spartans. We all know the story of the 300, and that's kind of where my limit lies. I don't know how if they kind of went outwards with that army, but they're the only one that I can think of. As soon as you hear the word Spartan, you think, oh, warrior, fighter, trained, and that's the one that's akin to Vikings. But yeah, I was just curious as to why that stuck, why that kind of.
Yeah, it's very hard to say why it stuck.
You don't think of the artwork is that the Vikings made is stunning. It's breathtaking, especially when you look at it and look at the stories that might be told with it and the depth to it and the intricacies of especially the little boxes. But it just goes completely overlooked for the most part.
Yeah, it does. And I mean, there is so much in the sagas that isn't about violence. It's about interactions between reasonably plausible people and lawsuits and everything else. And I really do think it just comes out of people's obsession with glory and the glamour of warfare.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I do know that if you look at something like Google Ngram's viewer, you get a massive uptick in the use of the word warrior around the middle of the 19th century, which is about the same sort of time you start getting a lot more research into Viking Age Scandinavia. And perhaps it relates to some of those ideas there, or perhaps that research actually triggered the interest in warriors. It's just very hard to say why. I think, but I really do think it just comes out of the glamour and the 13-year-old boy in all of us.
Mm-hmm. I was just looking. I'd never heard of Google Ngram Viewer before, and I typed it in. Is this just a system that looks at how often a single word
Essentially,
is
yeah.
used from throughout a time period? So I don't know why it's automatically pulled up Albert Einstein, Sherlock Holmes, and Frankenstein, and plotted them on a lovely little graph from the 1800s all the way up to present, and the usage of it seems to be the usage of those words. This is fascinating. There's so much stuff that I don't even know exists.
Oh, I know it's brilliant. I mean, it's limited in some ways because it's reliant on the books that have been put into Google Books.
Right. Okay.
But
Yeah.
when you start, I mean, for the 19th century, I wouldn't worry too much. Firstly, there weren't as many books published then as there are now. And secondly, those are all public domain anyway, so that's good. That's easy to use. But they do the same up to the present day. And it's very interesting to see that Viking starts becoming popular again from around 1980, and Warrior starts becoming popular again from about 2007. suggesting that there's a huge uptick again in interest in Vikings.
Oh wow!
Um,
So what's the chart on the left that says 0.000000009%? Is that the percentage of words it can find in all the books? That's the percentage of the use of the word Viking.
yeah, I think so. It's been a while since I actually looked at it, so I don't
Because
remember precisely how it looks like. But
yeah, I just typed it in. I'm gonna share my screen, and so anybody on YouTube can look at this as well. Um, just quickly as we digress a little
yeah,
bit.
I mean,
Um,
it's just fascinating, and you could lose absolute hours going down a rabbit hole of looking up every single word that you find interesting.
because you have Viking, it is more popular in 1883, 1891, the early 1900s, and 1927 than it is today.
Yep, and then it drops off with the Second World War for some strange reason.
Yeah, and then we have this whole period where it's still kind of interesting.
Yeah,
Um, but and then you see this spike in 2007, which I guess rings true to popular culture, and then 2014. I wonder when the Vikings TV show came out. I bet that's
I mean,
around this sort of time.
it corresponds quite well with the Vikings TV show and Giles Christian publishing books about Vikings and
Yeah.
Bernard Cornwell's book series on Uhtred and
Mm-hmm.
things like that.
But pre 18, so 1838. Now I'd love to know what happened in 1830. 1839 is where you see this sharp spike. But before that, it's pretty much non-existent, isn't it?
It's pretty much non-existent. I suspect that's actually, as much as anything else, lack of data.
Okay.
I do know that words like berserker were started being used by people like Sir Walter Scott from 1820, and his book The Pirate is one of the earliest references in print.
Mm-hmm.
And you get things about Vikings in there when Walter Scott and people like that started using the Vikings as part of their nation building process, building national identities.
Yeah. I wonder how well it picks up on spelling, because I mean, assume this the way we spell words has changed over time as well. Um, so I quickly just put in Vikinger with an R in the end,
Yeah,
and you have hits from the early 18 1800s to 1845. Oh, that's quite interesting. I'm going to share this again. I'm so sorry. I've just got completely sidetracked by this, but this. I think this is quite interesting because the last one we saw a spike in 1849, but we see here it kind of goes down to nothing using it with having the R in the end of Viking, and then
yeah.
up till.
I
So I
mean that's
wonder if
quite. Sorry.
there's. I was going to say I wonder if there's a change in the spelling around
I
that
mean
time of
the
common.
earliest publications do use Vikinger with the
Mm,
R, and you get quite a lot of early Victorian texts that actually just use the Old Norse word straight
yeah.
rather
So
than adapting it.
yeah, I wonder if that kind of shows that. Anyway, we digress. That was I've never come across that before. I'm going to have so much fun typing random words into there later.
I've just either made or spoilt your Sunday night sleep, haven't I?
You have, yes. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
But yeah,
um,
you get these upticks in interest that are evident there, even within the limitations of Google Ngram's viewer.
mhm,
So you can kind of see where things start coming along and being more interesting to people. And you do get an uptick from around 1980 as well, which is interesting. Viking warriors suddenly became popular again about that time,
mhm.
and you start seeing them in movies, and they become a strongly individualistic type instead of the community based people that they would have been historically. And it fits very well with the advent of sort of libertarian economic policies, where it's all about the individuals being stronger than everybody else around them, and the whole
Right.
pull yourself up by the bootstraps attitude.
Mm-hmm.
So that is an ongoing trend in many ways in a lot of Viking media that you get. And it's in direct contradiction to what's actually in Havamal about being a good friend to your friends.
Yeah. Let let's transition to Havamal and
Yep.
what, because I know in the when we spoke about this before, I don't know if we put it in the bio or not. You said how, I guess it's not misinterpreted in modern times, but people use the Havamal to back up the idea of a warrior, whereas you think maybe it contradicts it.
I think if you do a word count, warfare is going to be considerably less than being reasonable and hospitable and community minded. Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I've not done an actual count of battle related terms, but I do know that you've got the verse that says about not stepping away from your weapons. You've got the verse that includes about standing firm in battle. And then you've got the two renown verses, the Cattle Die Kinsman Die verses, which actually don't mention battle, but are very often taken to mean dying in battle and gaining everlasting fame.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Um, I mean, certainly the pop culture discourse, it frequently suggests that, rather than suggesting that, because the Old Norse word used is domur, it means judgment more than fame. So it's more about how you will be judged after you're dead.
Right. Okay.
And that would mean that this would be relevant to somebody like Njal Thorgerson in Njal Saga, who was famous not for fighting battles, but for actually being good at litigating and giving good advice.
Do you think there's some part to play by translation
Yes.
in how it's perceived? Because again, I think for most people, and it took me a long time to get my head around this, of having so many different people on here, that translation can never ever be 100%. There is always some, either the words don't exist in the language that you're going to, or the author has to take, or the translator has to take some liberties in trying to either get the context across, or if you're talking about a poetic verse, they have to, whether they try to keep the rhythm or go more with context. You have to make a balance. It's never one for one. It can never be exactly what it is. It's always got some skew or alteration to it. And those, I guess, especially when you're going from Old Norse to English, which is so widely read. Most, I would dare say that, 90, I'm going to pull a figure out my ass, but, the vast, vast, vast majority of people who have read Havamal, the Poetic Edda, the Prose Edda, will have read them in English, because it's the biggest speaking language, I guess, of people interested in this stuff. Maybe I'm wrong, but I would guess.
I'd be willing to guess alongside of you with that. The
Thank.
majority of
Whew,
people,
I was sweating then for a second. I was like, "Oh my
no,
god!"
majority of people will have read them in English. I mean, I don't know how many people in the world actually read Old Norse. I don't know how many people have actually studied it enough to actually understand the context beyond just reading it, because even if you can read it in Old Norse, doesn't necessarily mean you understand it.
Mm-hmm.
Because there is context, there are metaphors, there are all kinds of things going on in the background. And if you sat down with a dictionary and read it and translated it word for word, that means you've probably missed a chunk of the actual social context.
Mm-hmm.
But translation is interpretive. The words we choose for the translation are part of the skill of the people who do translations, and there are there are very rarely direct correlations. I mean, Old Norse egg and modern English egg mean the same thing, but beyond that, uh, because we use the Old Norse word in English
Oh,
as well, which is
well,
interesting.
eggs. I do love an egg.
Yeah, me too. But yeah, essentially the translation's an interpretation. So what you're getting is the translator's idea of what it means, not necessarily what the person reading it in the medieval period or hearing it in the medieval period would have understood by it.
Yeah.
And to really go into it and try and understand nuance, we've got to actually look at these things in detail in the original language. Of course, I'm then going to further complicate it by saying that if you're reading one of the many editions of an Old Norse saga, you're not reading the original saga either, because the person who has edited that edition has had to make decisions based on missing words in a text manuscript, or words that have been copied incorrectly in the medieval period, or there's a lot goes on here. So you're right is the short answer.
I don't hear that too often, so I'm taking it.
Yeah. So yeah, and I mean, this is where I think we also run into issues because language usage changes. A lot of people will have read them in free editions that are available online, especially if they're enthusiastic enough to seek out all of the many different translations that are available. Which means that you're looking at something that's translated most often in the 19th century. So it's written differently from how we would write it today as well.
And I guess even in more recent years, with the invention of social media and I guess the ability of independent research, whether good or bad, that people like to put their own spin on things. So they will maybe want to rewrite the Havamal or take different quotes or passages or verses and maybe just tweak them a little bit to fit a more modern ear. But it won't always have the caveat that that's been done. So somebody might come across a meme or a post on Instagram of a that says, verse whatever 52 from Havamal, but it's not, even that's not a direct copy of the translation that was done by somebody who was trying to be sensitive to the material. It's a kind of tweak of a translation of a translation.
Yeah.
And it gets lost.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know where I go from here.
Is that a can of worms?
It's a can of worms. I mean, I'm just happy if people are reading this material and keeping it popular enough. But it would also be great if people could access more modern translations that have been done by people who have actually read into the Old Norse fully. And for that, I think something like Edward Pettit's translation of the Poetic Edda, which I'm going to give it a plug because it's freely available online and is a dual text edition. So you can have the Old Norse on one side of the page and the English translation on the other.
Oh, nice.
So that's useful because that's a very recent translation. So it's going to be much better than reading Olive Bray's translation from the early 1900s or any others, because it will be in an idiom that people understand. And to some extent, I also quite like things like Jackson Crawford's Cowboy Havamal.
Yeah.
Because for the same reason, it's an idiom that people can understand, and he's an expert in the Old Norse language. So I have a reasonably large amount of trust that he has produced something that captures the essence of what's going on, rather than just translating word for word. Using a dictionary like Cleesby Vigfusson, which is from 1860. Was it 1860 or 1864 possibly? But is interpreted, the English translations there are 19th century. They're not 21st century. So you go to that and you might see a word there and go, oh, that means that. But then it's maybe changed nuance or even entire meaning. And so with that in mind, again, something like the Old Norse, the Dictionary of Old Norse Prose, which is still unfortunately in progress being developed, provides more modern English and Danish translations of words.
Mhm.
But they only got as far as publishing up to B so far.
Oh, that's not very far.
But there's a lot more in there, and
Yeah.
they are updating and editing it.
Mhm.
So something like that, which again, another thing for your Sunday nights is go find the Dictionary of Old Norse Prose, find words you're interested in, and then you can find references, all the references to them in the sagas in Old Norse literature.
Would that be um what's the dictionary that's already around? I'm trying to find out. I have a copy over there, but I can't get it
There
now.
is Zoega's dictionary, which is smaller and more easily to get hold of than Cleesby Vigfusson, but it's based on
Um,
Cleesby Vigfusson.
the Rudolf Simek one, the Dictionary of Norse Mythologies, is different. Actually, would it be different to that? Is that more focused on a dictionary of the characters?
Rudy Simex is basically an encyclopedia of Old Norse mythology, even though it's called dictionary. So it's entries about things in Old Norse myth, whereas the
Right. Okay.
dictionaries are just the words and the
Okay.
references to the texts.
Right. Okay. I'm with you.
So, so yeah. So sorry, I am grossly overcomplicating reading sagas for everyone now. I
But
do apologise.
I think that it's something that I cannot stress enough on this podcast. It comes up over and over and over again that in reality, what we know for certain when it comes to this time period, and probably I imagine it's the same for any time period. If you spoke to somebody about Rome in some really niche conversations like we have on the
Mhm.
podcast, it would be the same kind of answers that we kind of don't really know for certain much. It's
Yeah,
all interpreted, it's all theory based on theory. And I think that's one thing that people really need to get comfortable with is just being happy to sometimes be like, we don't really know. This is our best guess, or this is somebody's best guess, this is somebody's idea. And same with the translations, that it's the best I get the best guess of what they were thinking. And it's what we think that maybe they were trying to get through the message. And I think it's an important conversation to have because people too often will just because it's easier to read it and be like, yes, it is what it says. Or
yeah,
we know this because it's because a scholar's written it down, then it must be just 100% fact. And I think that's something that we people need to just kind of understand sometimes that it's not.
yeah, yeah. I agree. I mean, people clearly don't understand it, and I know this because Reddit is very keen on using English translations of sagas to tell me I'm wrong about my Berserker theories.
That's going to be frustrating.
It is what it is.
Well, but, okay, I guess we can touch on it quickly. This is how we got back in touch to this episode because I saw there just seems to be an insane amount of AI creator memes. I've mentioned it on here recently a lot. Of they'll just take a topic and say that something's whatever it is. This was about the berserkers and this recent find, and I was like, I don't think that sounds right, but I know the person I can ask about this. And I sent you in, and you were just like, actually, no, that's not. I've never heard of it, and you would be the person who would have heard of it. Um, and
Yeah,
you kind of gave me a nice answer. You told me where the mushroom theory comes from, and we went into detail. And I wrote a nice little reply back, and I posted it. But then you still get people who will reply, and because they've not heard of you for whatever reason, because again, I think Jackson Crawford has done so much help for people getting to this, but also people for some reason think he might be the only person who you can trust on anything. And if they haven't heard of him, if they haven't heard of a scholar on the same level as Jackson, they'll just go, I put out because I asked you whether I could quote you, and I put it in. I was like, Roderick specializes in Berserker. Nice little reply, and there's people are just like, never heard of him. Don't know if it's don't know if I can trust this or whatever. It's like, fuck me, you can't get anyone better to have the information from. And I point people towards the podcast all the time, and they're just like, no. And it's just, oh, what more can you do than give people answers from people who've spent years studying this? And they just go, no, actually, I'm just going to keep believing that they took mushrooms because that's kind of what I like.
Yeah, I mean, people are going to be like that. You know, it's the old saying about you can lead a horse to water, but a pencil must be led. So, you know, you can't, no, you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make it drink.
Yeah.
And essentially, you can make the information available. And I did publish the Big Book of Berserkers, Myths and Realities of the Viking Berserk. And I have read all the Berserker episodes for you, so you don't need to. I mean, I would read them anyway if I were you, but,
yeah.
you know. And I've looked at the material in the original language, not based on later research. I've looked at the later research, and then I've looked at the medieval material and compared the two and seen where they don't actually tally. But the problem is for me is that the argument is very literary and linguistic, and that isn't necessarily what people are actually willing to engage with. I mean, it's the same kind of thing that we're talking about here with warriors. My argument is very literary and linguistic because it's about incidents of warriors in Old Norse literature, where you find them, where you don't find them, and where the grey areas are. So
a majority of it probably is grey area.
There's a lot of grey areas. There's also a lot of not fighting.
And
a lot more not fighting than there is fighting, to be honest.
I bet, yeah. Well, anybody who's been with us long enough has been with us through episodes that we've done as bonus shows for like story time, where we'll read a different saga. And we attempted in the early days to read them in their entirety and quickly realized they're not very fun. There's a lot of them that are really boring, and there's a lot of listing of names and places and to-ing and fro-ing, and then occasionally you'll get some action, and then it's a lot of boring stuff again.
Oh yeah, it is. I mean, there's a lot in the sagas that is written for the contemporary audience. It's not written with us in mind at all.
No.
You know, and so they name places because those places were important to the contemporary audience. They name people because those people were important to that audience. And they talk about what was going on. It was sagas of the Icelanders, especially. They talk about what was going on in Iceland around the end of the Viking Age. And they're not interested. The fighting is almost incidental in some ways. I mean, yeah, it's great when you hear somebody got hit with an axe so hard it knocked their teeth out onto the floor. But you know, what's important is the social interaction and the building of society and realizing who the important people were and wondering who their descendants were at the time these things were being written down. You know, and I think there's a reason why some sagas are more popular than others. And it's not just to do with the quality of the literature, it's also to do with how bolshy Egil Skallagrimsson was and how willing he was to fight when needed or to talk crap about people.
Yeah, absolutely.
As he does in the duel with, what do they call him now? Now my brain's not working. In one of the duels where he's, I should know this. This is actually my area.
That happens. That happens.
I know, but you know, and the guy's busy doing his Berserksgangur before the fight, and Egil Skallagrim says, "You ready?" Yeah, he says, "No."
Is it Berg?
No, it's not Bergonen. It's Bjotrin Blakey, Bjot the Pale.
Okay, yeah, that's the one that came up next.
Yeah, and basically, he's busy doing his Berserksgangur, which I really want people to translate as Berserker Strut, and getting ready for the duel. And Egil's, "Are you ready yet?" He says, "No, a bit more." bit of time to go. So Egil promptly comes out with some poetry, basically just talking crap about him until he's ready for the duel.
Yeah,
You know,
I
and
I love that theory on the Berserker strut. I think it's I think it makes perfect sense. I like it. I think that's exactly what we're
yeah,
dealing with.
and your Trim Blakey might well have been one of those guys that actually had that warrior identity because he was always going off to do the duels and fight people for their possessions and daughters and wives and anything else that was lying around loose enough for him to pick up.
Mm-hmm.
According to the saga, anyway.
Yeah.
But it's also a classic episode where the literary analysis shows that he's not gone berserk because there are these big pauses between him doing the Berserkganga, which is usually translated as going berserk, and the actual fighting. And so yeah.
Oh. Yeah, I think we should if you're up for it, we should do another episode on Berserker. It's been a long time and I'd love to get into the mushroom theory and that whole origins. So
Yeah,
we could book that in the future. Because I think that would be it'd be really valuable. But to get back kind of I guess
get back on track.
on track for this, is there anything that we were missing or anything we've kind of jumped over?
I mean, we've mentioned that Havamal is predominantly not about fighting. It's about building community.
Mm-hmm.
So the thing that I've been thinking a lot about is how the warrior aesthetic that we identify now, particularly from pop culture media, is not present in Havamal. But one of the things that I really feel is worth remembering is that we do have a couple of poems by people from the late Viking Age or just after that identify what the kinds of things we should think they had as their identities. What was important to them?
Mm-hmm.
Um, the first of those is a poem actually that's written down and claims to have been composed by Haraldur Hardraði Sigurðarson
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
before his death in 1066. And he basically says that he has 8 accomplishments, 8 skills. These are the things that identify him as a person, what he's good at. One of them is poetry, and it's not a bad verse when you read it in Old Norse. So, yeah, I'm going to go with that.
Oh,
He's
good.
skilled at traveling swiftly on horseback, so he's good at riding fast.
Oh,
So he's
nice.
a good
Yeah.
horseman. He's good at swimming
I
on
would
occasion.
I would never have guessed that. I wouldn't have put that as being a priority, but I guess for a seafaring people, it's probably really important.
Kind of useful.
Yeah.
Yeah. So he says he can ski. He says he can shoot. So he's good at archery.
Mm-hmm.
And being a bit modest, he says he can row well enough.
Right.
So,
Okay.
also he knows harp playing and poems.
Oh, it's got a gentle heart. It feels.
Yeah, it's kind of when he's not trying to kill you. If you met him socially, you might well like him.
Yeah, except the hard ruler must come from somewhere. You don't get a
Oh yeah.
nickname like that for no reason.
I mean, I would always translate it personally as ruthless.
Okay.
I think that's as good a way of capturing the meaning
Mm-hmm.
as anything else. But where in there is actually being fighting, being a warrior king, and he's somebody who everybody thinks of as being a warrior king.
Yeah. Well, notably, everybody uses the last Viking warrior king. It's the one that people can herald.
But
Yeah,
those
he's
are the
not.
skills that he's saying identify him, are his identity. He's saying he's cultured. He knows the softer skills. He has the skills that somebody at the top of society should have.
Yeah, you would assume, if before reading that out, if you'd have asked me, I would be like, yeah, of course, being a good soldier or fighter or warrior is going to be on the list because that's what we think that they hold in high regard. because I guess we hold that in high regard for
Yeah.
Vikings. That's what we think of as a modern people, whereas maybe it wasn't such a
Well, I mean,
important
for
thing.
him, I think we can take it as read that he was a warrior in the definition that we're looking at.
Yeah.
His activities clearly point to that. And we can take it for read that he was good at it because he lived quite a while and got through a lot of fighting and battles. But it wasn't important to him. He's not somebody who would say, "I'm a warrior." He'd say, "Oh yeah, I'm a poet and a harp player."
Mm. Could that
Uh,
be just because it's such a big part of the culture? They don't really identify it as a as an important trait because it's just something that everybody has to do, or it's you know a really kind of big thing, so you kind of overlook it. If that does that make sense?
yeah, it's incidental to his identity because everybody around him is also meant to be a great warrior.
Yeah.
And it's taken as read. So he's not going to stand up and say, "I am a Viking warrior." He's going to stand up and say, you know, "I can swim and I can row and I can shoot a bow and I understand poetry."
But do you think if he was a I guess if he was a bad warrior, he wouldn't have got to the position he was. But let's say he did. Do you think that it would be picked upon by the others that he was a bad warrior?
I,
As in, would it
sus-
be important enough that they were like, "Oh, well, he's a bad warrior"?
I think that if he wasn't King Harold and he was bad at being a warrior, he wouldn't be in the king's bodyguard. He wouldn't have been part of a retinue.
Hmm.
He would have had to go off and find something else to do.
Yeah.
You actually get that episode in Hrolfsaga. I'm coming back to Hrolfsaga again, where Hutter, who became Hjalti, is sitting in the corner having bones thrown at him and has built a wall of bones because he is a bad warrior.
Oh, feels quite
And,
sad.
and it's only when Buthvar comes along and basically helps him that he suddenly becomes Hjalti and a great warrior and one of the greatest in the warband. So you could definitely see Harold, if he was a bad warrior, having bones thrown at him at the feasts. So, but I mean, you get something similar with Jarl Rögnvaldr Karli Kolsson from Orkney. A little bit later, it's 12th century, but he has nine skills that he identifies, which are similar to Harold Hardrada's as well. I think he's gone for 9 just to one up Haraldr personally,
Okay.
because Harold only has 8.
Is
Because
this a
he had
thing that's quite common? Just listing your skills like a Tinder profile, kind of.
it's really not, but I mean, if it was a Tinder profile, this would be these guys' Tinder
Yeah,
profiles.
I'm really good at poetry, horseback riding.
Yeah, and the interesting one with Rungvalder is that he adds to it board games. He's good at playing board games.
Okay.
I mean, think about it. The samurai played Go, and that was
Yeah.
considered a high accomplishment to be good at it. People
Yeah.
in the medieval period played chess and were expected to be good at it. It was a
It's,
social accomplishment.
it is a. I guess there it is akin to warfare, though, isn't it? It's that strategy of the mind, and
It is to some extent, although chess is more of a merchant's game than Go, he says, revealing his prejudices.
okay.
But I mean, at the time that Rungvalder was Jarl, he would have been playing Knefertafel anyway, probably. Chess was
Hmm.
only starting to arrive in Europe, although being popularized in the Frankish kingdoms at that point. But also, he says he forgets runes slowly, so runes are important to him.
Yeah.
Um, Reading books, craftsmanship, plus the other stuff that Harolder does as well. So those are all the things that people of the time thought were important, and between that and the long genealogies, which show that the family was their identity,
Hmm.
we can probably say he's another one who wouldn't have stood up and said, "I'm a warrior."
Right. Okay. So what? I guess what's the conclusion that we can take from that?
Long or short?
Um, we've been going
Shortish.
we've been going an hour and a half, so let's say short-ish.
Right. There is definitely a warrior class,
Yeah.
lords and kings bodyguards, people who would have been identified by others as warriors.
Mm-hmm.
Um, we get that. We get skaldic verse, which deals with being warriors. There are 935 kennings for warrior in skaldic verse that I will not dispute.
Okay.
So, right. But skaldic verse is the verse of the courts. It's written in Trotkveit, court meter.
Mm-hmm.
So it's for the social elite. So it's about the social elite's preoccupations. Um, and for that reason, you know, essentially, if we look at that, we see warriors everywhere. But that's only because we're looking at like the one percenters in Old Norse society, in Viking Age society.
Okay. Yeah.
When we look at Havamal, we see what the ideals, at least, of the rest of society are supposed to be. And it actually says to princes as well, you've got to be moderate.
Mm-hmm.
So even the warriors are not the overbearing warriors, or at least not meant to be the overbearing warriors that we kind of associate who take what they want. They're not House Greyjoy in Game of Thrones. Um, and so, with that in mind, the takeaway for me is that if we only look at the warriors, we're looking at a small percentage of people in that society. We're not judging them the way they would have judged themselves. We're giving them a single identity, which from both Harold and Rungvalder, we can see that they are presenting other identities as well. So we're reducing them to a caricature of who they were,
Right.
which
Okay.
is
Yeah.
something that Leszek Gardel has also written in his Women and Weapons in the Viking North.
Mm-hmm.
Um, or is it Viking World? Yeah, whatever. You know the title.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, so essentially, we're doing an injustice to the past by simplifying it to the point where we are creating an an identity that might have been at best a tiny percentage of the people who lived there. So when we're actually looking at them, what all I'm saying is, can we please remember these were people who lived, laughed, and raided monasteries. Or no, maybe not all raided monasteries, but who lived real lives,
Mm-hmm.
had real dreams, real fears, and we're not all warriors.
Yeah.
It creates, and it's something that feeds into various kinds of misuses of the Vikings. The idea that they were all rough, tough warriors who came from the far north and where you couldn't grow anything, and which was so mountainous there was no farmland anyway,
Mm-hmm.
and therefore it creates very negative views of the past in some ways. People look at it as positive because we're looking at the violence from a distance.
Yeah.
Um, you know, it's okay to go on Mech Warrior 5 and blow up the housing developments there because it's distanced from you. It's okay to play Assassin's Creed Valhalla and attack people, or play Skyrim and attack people because it's distanced. In the same way, the Vikings in the past are
Mm-hmm.
distanced.
I completely agree with that. I think I had this discussion last week with Ross Downing about how, in more of a modern sense, that I think as we get further away from the atrocities caused by the Nazis, that people will, it won't be have such an effect on people because that as that time goes and the people that were directly affected all pass away and it's then
Yeah,
secondhand. And I just think that it becomes less, not less severe, but there's less kind of jerk reaction to it and kind of personal. And I think that's the
yeah,
same with throughout history. The further you get from things that happen with the Vikings, it's something you read in a history book. You lose that personal thought of it and that I guess kind of understanding and humanity to it.
yeah, yeah. We, in some respects, a lot of the pop culture depictions don't treat the Viking Age Scandinavians as real human beings.
Mm.
People are complicated, and one day I do hope I'll be able to understand them. And back then they would have been just the same.
Yeah.
They were. Some people would never have left their family farms. They would never have gone on a raid. They might never even have picked up their weapons in anger. In fact, I would be willing to bet that the majority of people never did.
Yeah,
Uh,
I think that's a fantastic point, because it's so easy to judge a time period by the stereotypes that we hold today based on that. And even just within the Viking Age itself, which is a relatively short like age or time period. And I bet even within those 300 years, the the idea of a warrior changed from the start of the Viking Age to the end of the Viking Age. I bet what they would consider a warrior or a fighter would change, and the thoughts on it and how they maybe were held, and it things morph and change even within the time periods we're talking about. So you can't just be like a one size fits all.
yeah, I mean, society was evolving. I'm going back to the fall of Rome again, all the way from the fall of Rome through to when the fully medieval institutions took hold in Scandinavia to the extent they did.
Mm-hmm.
And who would have thought and when would have changed in that time period as well, with the centralization of power. And in some ways, the Huskarls of the late Viking Age are pretty much in the same place as the retinues of medieval knights or medieval
Yeah.
lords. They are substantially the same types of people.
Mm-hmm.
And the question then is, how far back do these social institutions go? But it was not the old idea of an entire tribe of people under arms.
Yeah. Yeah. I think I agree. I think we need to remember people as just as people, as humans, that they
Yep.
have fears, and this idea that till Valhalla, everyone wants to die so they can. Everyone wants to die in battle so they can go to Valhalla. No one's scared. People are people, and humans have the same emotions today as they had 1,000 years
Yep.
ago. And if you don't think that they did, then you don't know people.
There is a verse in Havamal that addresses this too, that
Okay.
specifically states that it's better to be alive and footless because a man with no foot can still ride. A blind
Yeah.
man still has uses and everything else. It's better to be alive than to be burnt on the pyre, which is the exact opposite of the whole Till Valhalla thing.
It is. Yeah. Absolutely. Which it is though. Sometimes that's a you know the meaning behind that rings true today. Whether people don't necessarily get their feet chopped off and their eyes poked out as much today, hopefully.
Oh,
But I think the sentiment behind it, the idea that sometimes it's just better to walk away, or to back away, or just to, it's not a weakness to not engage in conflict. Sometimes it's the smarter thing is to just be like, even if you know you're right, or you could win, or just what, it's easier or better just to be like, okay, and just do your own thing, and you live to fight, or live to whatever another day.
that's it. I mean, there is a lot of negotiation in the sagas of the Icelanders, the boring
Hmm.
bits, as you called it.
Yeah.
Uh, and the law cases, they're all about mediating between people.
Hmm.
So, yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely right. And we can see it in the sagas too if we actually look for those bits.
Hmm. Perfect. Let's, unless there's anything else that you feel we need to touch on.
No, I don't think we have another 2 hours for discussing Valhalla, do we?
We don't, but we can discuss it next time.
It's an option. Yep.
Yeah, we
Yeah.
will. Yeah, we'll book it in, because I think Valhalla would be great to talk about. I did want to do
Actually,
Berserkers, but let's do
oh, we
Valhalla.
can do Berserkers. I'm very happy to do that. But also, we can talk about all the other places the dead go that isn't Valhalla.
Yeah, absolutely. That would be great. Okay, Roderick, do you have anywhere social media wise that you want to point people?
No, not anymore.
No.
No.
Well, that's nice and easy then. For me, it's Daniel and one, Horns of Odin for the business, Nordic Mythology podcast across the board. And if you just go on YouTube, you can see our lovely faces. Hit the like, subscribe, little bell button so you get notified every time we put a video on there. And with that said, thank you very much, Roderick.
Thank you.